Windsor Essex is thawing out from Mother Nature's latest edition of the Polar Vortex, and with temperatures beginning to slowly moderate, the focus now shifts to how the fluctuating weather affects our general health. Dr. Alan Heimann is the Chief Medical Officer for Windsor and Essex, and he provides some answers to that very central question.
Well, certainly this is weather that we haven't seen in about 20 years, but it's weather that we have seen before. And so I think the most important thing with regards to the effect of this extreme cold weather is whether or not individuals are prepared. If individuals do have to go outside and they are properly clothed, then the effects are relatively minor. But if individuals are not prepared for the weather, if they go outside and they're not properly clothed, they're not dressed in layers, they don't have gloves or scarves or hats or proper footwear, then individuals can experience either a local cold injury, such as frostbite, and with weather that we saw earlier this week and in the first week in January, that can literally occur within a few minutes. If a person's out without a hat or scarf or gloves, they can experience injury to their ears, to their nose, to their hands, literally within minutes, because it's not just the cold itself, it's the wind chill effect. And we've seen wind chills down to minus 30, minus 20, which is certainly extreme and can be very dangerous. But for individuals who are properly prepared and understand the effects of the weather, it's relatively minor effects. A lot of it depends on experience and preparation given.
And can you also tell me who is the most vulnerable in weather like this, and how can people be prepared for this type of weather from a health perspective?
Well, certainly, as with a lot of illnesses or injuries, it's the very young and the very old who are most liable to injury. The very young, because when you get children who are playing outside, they're often not properly dressed, and sometimes even if they are properly dressed when they go outside, they'll have a tendency to take their gloves off, to take their hat off, to take their scarf off, to unzip their jacket if they get a little hot, and then they start becoming cold, but they tend possibly to ignore the symptoms. Now, with the elderly, sometimes with older individuals, their circulation is impaired. So again, the blood going to their hands, to their feet, especially to their feet, is not as in younger individuals. And if they're not properly dressed, they can experience a cold injury, frostbite, relatively quickly. And if they do experience frostbite, it can be more serious because of compromised circulation. It's difficult to re-warm the extremity. So again, it's younger children because sometimes they're not observant of the precautions that need to be taken, and then older individuals because of pre-existing medical conditions, they can be more susceptible to cold injury.
And in terms of pre-existing health conditions, if older people have pre-existing health conditions, can you just expand on what the cold weather means for them and the precautions that they have to take?
Well, a lot of it, of course, depends upon the type of pre-existing medical condition. Let's say an individual has a heart condition. It means that their heart reserve, their stamina is not as great, and if an individual after a heavy snowfall with a heart condition goes out and tries to shovel snow, it can put extreme pressure on the heart, and individual can suffer a heart attack. Individuals who have lung conditions, such as asthma or chronic obstructive lung disease, they can have problems with the cold weather when they're outside and they breathe the cold air in. It can increase the tendency for spasm in their lungs. For individuals with diabetes, they can have problems associated with their circulation, and it can cause increased damage to their extremities, to their feet especially, but also to their hands because their circulation is impaired with their diabetes. And with older individuals, if their bones are not as strong as they were when they were younger, slip and fall injury can be much more devastating to older individuals. Fractured limbs, especially fractured hips. And for an older individual, a fracture can be severely debilitating and can really change their lifestyle. So in addition to just the cold, there's also the snow and ice on the ground, which can cause increased susceptibility to slip and fall.
And could you also tell me what are the most common health conditions, or what are you seeing the most that people are suffering from the cold weather?
I would say certainly minor frostbite, minor cold injury, individuals who've been out without gloves or with a hat or scarf, they'll have some mild injury to their ears, to their nose, to their hands, sometimes to their toes, but it's generally relatively minor. It will start out with increased redness or swelling, and then as the injury progresses, the extremity can feel hard or woody, and when those symptoms occur, damage to the tissue is happening. And the first thing they need to do is to get out of the cold and to try to re-warm that extremity and make sure that that extremity isn't re-injured.
And when the weather starts to moderate and the temperatures get warmer, how does your health, adapt to the changing weather, or are there any lingering effects from the cold weather as the temperature rises?
Not particularly, but again, one of the problems is after a cold period and it warms up a bit, people tend to forget that if you're out in the cold for a long time, if it doesn't feel as cold as it does previously, some people have the tendency to forget to dress as warmly as they might when the cold was a little more severe. And you can also get cold injury when the temperature is warmer if you're not properly dressed and, for example, your feet get wet. If it's cold and damp, you can experience injury to your feet, even if it's relatively warm weather. But in general, again, if people are prepared, if they're properly dressed, lingering cold injury, unless they've had severe frostbite, is not a problem.
And finally, what would be your message or tips to people as they try to combat the cold weather and stay warm, and also, of course, stay healthy?
I think the most important thing is to be prepared, to realize that when we have extreme cold weather, that you can experience cold injury, and to make sure that you're properly dressed. Again, dress in layers. Make sure that your extremities are covered, that you've got gloves, scarf, hat, and you've got good footwear so that you don't have to worry as much about slip and fall. It's important to dress in layers because if you're outside, if you're working or you're exercising and you feel a little warm, then you can unzip one of the layers or take one of the layers off and cool down gradually so that you don't build up a sweat, because exercising in the cold, building up a sweat can certainly cause problems, because it's not just staying warm that's important when you're out in the winter, it's also staying dry.
From the Windsor Essex Health Unit, I'm Kevin McShan for the YouTube News Blitz.